The dust swirled across Cherry Creek's main street as the stagecoach rattled to a stop outside the general store, its arrival breaking the sleepy afternoon quiet that had settled over the Nevada mining town. Jane Owens clutched her small carpetbag with white-knuckled fingers, her heart hammering against her ribs as the driver called out their arrival. She had traveled for days, each mile putting distance between herself and the nightmare she'd fled, but not the memories that haunted her every waking moment. The year was 1878, and Cherry Creek was nothing more than a collection of wooden structures nestled in the unforgiving Nevada landscape, a silver mining town that had sprung up almost overnight when ore had been discovered in the nearby mountains. To Jane, it represented her last hope, a place so remote that perhaps even he couldn't find her. "Last stop, Cherry Creek," the driver announced, climbing down to help his passengers disembark. Jane waited until the other passengers had departed before attempting to step down. Her body ached with every movement, the bruises hidden beneath her modest traveling dress still fresh and tender. When she finally emerged, she kept her eyes fixed on the weathered boards of the platform beneath her feet, afraid to meet the curious gazes of those who had gathered to witness the stagecoach's arrival. A strong hand suddenly appeared in her field of vision, causing her to flinch violently. The hand withdrew immediately. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice, gentle despite its resonance. "Didn't mean to startle you." Jane dared a quick glance upward, just enough to see a tall man in a worn leather vest, a dusty cowboy hat shading his face. She looked away immediately, her shoulders hunching as if to make herself smaller. "I'm Cole Foster," the man continued, his voice softer now. "I own the ranch just outside of town. Are you planning to stay in Cherry Creek?" Jane nodded slightly, still not looking up. I have a position." "At the schoolhouse." The man Cole made no move to touch her again, but she could feel his gaze studying her, taking in her downcast eyes, the way she held herself as if one wrong move would shatter her completely. "The schoolteacher position. That's good news. Town's been without one since Miss Hendricks left last spring." He paused, then added, "Do you need help with your luggage?" Jane shook her head quickly, clutching her small bag tighter. "This is all I have." A long silence stretched between them before Cole spoke again. "You look like you could use a hot meal and some rest. Mrs. Peterson runs the boarding house just down the street. Good woman, doesn't ask too many questions." Something in his tone made Jane risk another quick glance. There was no pity in his eyes, just a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole took a step back, giving her space. "Whatever you're running from, madam, you're safe here." Jane's eyes snapped up to his face for the first time, truly meeting his gaze. His eyes were a deep brown, steady and serious. There was no mockery there, no hidden agenda she could detect, just a simple statement offered with the certainty of someone who made promises sparingly and kept them rigorously. "You don't know that," she said, her voice barely audible. "I do," he replied, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his hip in a gesture that wasn't threatening but somehow reassuring. "Cherry Creek takes care of its own, and as of today, that includes you." Jane felt something shift inside her chest, not trust, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile seed of possibility that trust might someday grow. "The boarding house is the blue building?" she asked, her voice slightly steadier. Cole nodded. "That's right. Tell Mrs. Peterson that Cole sent you. She'll take good care of you." With a tip of his hat, Cole Foster stepped away, his spurs jingling softly as he moved toward the general store. Jane watched him go, her mind whirling with confusion and the faintest glimmer of hope. Perhaps Cherry Creek could indeed be a place of safety. Perhaps, for the first time in years, She might be able to close her eyes at night without fear. Jane made her way slowly down the dusty street, conscious of the curious glances from the townspeople, but determined to reach the sanctuary of the boarding house. Each step sent pain radiating through her body, reminders of the violence she had endured at her husband's hands. Former husband, she corrected herself. The papers were official, even if Richard refused to accept them. The divorce had been granted in Denver, a small miracle in itself, though it had cost her nearly everything she owned to secure it. All she had left was her teaching certificate, the clothes on her back, and a desperate determination to build a new life far from Richard Owens' reach. When Jane reached the boarding house, she hesitated on the porch, gathering her courage before knocking softly on the door. It swung open almost immediately to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Why, hello there," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be our new schoolteacher. I'm Esther Peterson." Jane nodded, keeping her eyes focused on Mrs. Peterson's shoulder rather than her face. "Jane Owens. Mr. Foster said you might have a room available. Cole sent you." "Well then, you must come right in, Mrs." Peterson stepped aside, ushering Jane into a warm parlor that smelled of fresh baked bread and coffee. "You look ready to drop, poor dear. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Jane couldn't remember. The journey had been a blur of anxiety and pain, with food the last thing on her mind. "I'm fine, really. I just need a room if you have one." "I have the perfect room," Mrs. Peterson said, her tone brooking no argument. "But first, you'll sit down and have some stew and biscuits while I prepare it for you." Too exhausted to protest, Jane allowed herself to be guided to a chair at the kitchen table. Mrs. Peterson busied herself ladling thick beef stew into a bowl, chattering amiably about the town and its inhabitants. Cherry Creek's a good place, despite what some might say about mining towns. "We've got good people here. Sheriff Davis keeps the peace, and troublemakers don't last long." She set the steaming bowl in front of Jane along with a plate of golden biscuits. "Eat up now. You need your strength for those children you'll be teaching." 23 of them, last I counted, ranging from 6 to 15. Jane picked up her spoon, forcing herself to eat despite her knotted stomach. The stew was rich and flavorful, warming her from the inside out. "The school term starts next Monday," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Gives you a few days to settle in. The schoolhouse is just past the church. Can't miss it. Town council had it freshly painted last month, knowing we'd be getting a new teacher." As Jane ate, Mrs. Peterson's gentle chatter washed over her like a soothing balm. No probing questions about the bruises visible on her wrists. No curious inquiries about what had brought her to Cherry Creek with nothing but a carpetbag. Just simple kindness and acceptance. "After the meal, Mrs." Peterson showed Jane to a small but tidy room on the second floor, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the main street. "Bathrooms down the hall," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Breakfast is at 7, but I can save you a plate if you need to sleep in." She paused at the door. "And Jane, whatever brought you here, it's in the past now. Cherry Creek can be a fresh start if you let it be," when the door closed behind Mrs. Peterson. Jane sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of her journey finally catching up to her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry not the silent tears she had learned to hide from Richard, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the girl she had once been, so full of dreams and hopes. She cried for the woman she had become, hardened by fear and pain. And somewhere in those tears was a tiny spark of something she hardly dared name relief, perhaps, or the faintest beginning of freedom. Outside her window, Cherry Creek continued its daily rhythms, men heading to the saloon after a day in the mines, shopkeepers closing up for the night, children being called home for dinner. Life continuing, unconcerned with her private pain. Jane wiped her eyes and slowly began to unpack her meager belongings. At the bottom of her bag, wrapped carefully in a nightgown, was the one thing she had risked everything to take with her: a small, leather-bound book of poetry that had been her mother's. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, drawing strength from the connection to the woman who had taught her that words could be both escape and salvation. Tomorrow, she would visit the schoolhouse and prepare for her new role. Tomorrow, she would begin the slow process of building a life in this dusty mining town at the edge of nowhere. Tonight, she would rest in this small room where, for the first time in years, she didn't need to sleep with one eye open. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant clanging of the mine shift bell. Jane woke disoriented, momentarily panicked before remembering where she was. Cherry Creek, safety. A new beginning. She dressed carefully, choosing her highest-necked dress to hide the worst of the bruises that blossomed like terrible flowers across her collarbone and shoulders. The mirror above the washstand reflected a woman she hardly recognized, thin to the point of gauntness, with shadows beneath her eyes and a wariness in her expression that made her look far older than her 24 years. "Downstairs, Mrs. Peterson greeted her with coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon. "There's a school board meeting this afternoon," the older woman informed her as Jane picked at her breakfast. "They'll want to meet you, I expect. Nothing formal, just a welcome. Judge Williams is the head of the board, stern but fair." Jane nodded, anxiety fluttering in her chest at the thought of meeting more people, of having to speak and be scrutinized. "What time?" 2 o'clock at the schoolhouse. "Plenty of time for you to get settled and take a look around the place first." Mrs. Peterson refilled Jane's coffee cup. "Mary Sullivan, she runs the mercantile with her husband, has been opening the schoolhouse once a week to dust and air it out. She'll have the key if you want to go over earlier." After breakfast, Jane made her way through the town toward the schoolhouse. Cherry Creek in daylight was a busy place, with miners heading to and from their shifts, wagons delivering supplies to the various businesses, and children darting between buildings in games of chase. The town had clearly grown rapidly, and without much planning, wooden buildings stood at odd angles to each other, with narrow alleys running between them like capillaries. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest white building with a small bell tower. As Jane approached, she noticed a tall figure on a ladder, working at something near the roof. It was Cole Foster, the cowboy from the day before. He was nailing a loose piece of siding back into place, his movements efficient and practiced. He didn't notice her at first, giving Jane a moment to observe him unawares. In the clear morning light, she could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably not more than 30, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His brown hair curled slightly where it extended beneath his hat, and his tanned face bore the weathered lines of someone who spent most of his days outdoors. As if sensing her presence, Cole glanced down, his hammer pausing mid-swing. "Morning, Miss Owens," he called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. Jane startled, wondering how he knew her name before remembering that in a town this size, news traveled quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Foster," she replied, forcing herself to meet his eyes briefly before looking away. Cole descended the ladder with easy grace. "Thought I'd fix that loose board before the next storm. Been meaning to get to it for weeks." "You don't need to do that on my account," Jane said quickly. "Not just for you," Cole assured her, tucking the hammer into his belt. "For the children." Can't have the school falling down around them, can we?" There was something about his direct gaze that made Jane feel simultaneously seen and safe, a disconcerting combination for someone who had learned that invisibility meant survival. She didn't know how to respond to his casual kindness, so she changed the subject. "I was hoping to see inside the schoolhouse before the board meeting this afternoon." "Mary left the key with me," Cole said, pulling it from his pocket. "She mentioned you might want to come by." He handed Jane the key, careful not to let their fingers touch, as if sensing her wariness of physical contact. "Thank you," Jane said, clutching the key tightly. Are you on the school board as well?" Cole smiled, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. "No, madam. Just a neighbor helping out. My ranch provides beef for most of the town, so I'm in and out of Cherry Creek regularly." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the schoolhouse door. "I'll leave you to get acquainted with your new domain. If you need anything fixed or moved, just let me know. I'll be around town until this afternoon." With a tip of his hat, Cole returned to his ladder, resuming his work on the siding. Jane hesitated, watching him for a moment, struck by the simple decency of a man who would repair a schoolhouse he had no personal connection to, simply because it needed doing. Inside, the schoolhouse was clean and orderly, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk at the front of the room. A blackboard covered most of one wall, and a small wood stove stood in the corner. Bookshelves lined another wall, sparsely filled with well-worn readers and primers. Large windows let in plenty of light, and someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the teacher's desk, a welcoming touch that brought an unexpected lump to Jane's throat. She ran her hand over the smooth surface of the desk, trying to imagine herself standing before a classroom of children. Before her marriage, she had taught briefly at a small school outside of Denver. She had loved it, the bright curiosity in her students' eyes, the satisfaction of watching them master new skills, the sense of purpose each day had brought. Then she had met Richard Owens, a handsome banker who had courted her with flowers and poetry and promises. The courtship had been a whirlwind, and within months, Jane had found herself married and removed from her beloved classroom, installed instead in a fine house in Denver, where her only duty was to be the perfect banker's wife. The descent into nightmare had been gradual. First came the criticisms of her housekeeping, her cooking, her conversation, her appearance. Then the isolation, as Richard systematically cut her off from friends and the few family members she had left. And finally, the violence, beginning with a slap that had shocked her to her core, escalating to beatings that left her unconscious. Jane shuddered, forcing the memories away. That life was over. She had escaped, had traveled hundreds of miles to this remote mining town where no one knew her past. Here, she could be just Miss Owens, the schoolteacher, not Richard Owens' failure of a wife who couldn't do anything right. She spent the morning exploring the schoolhouse, inventorying supplies, and making notes about what she would need for the coming term. The work was soothing, giving her mind something to focus on besides fear. Just before noon, a knock at the schoolhouse door made her jump. She approached cautiously, opening it just enough to see who was outside. A woman about Jane's age stood on the steps, holding a covered basket. She had bright red hair pulled back in a practical bun and a smattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks. "Hello there. I'm Rachel Davis, the sheriff's wife," the woman said cheerfully. "Thought you might be hungry after working all morning, so I brought lunch." She held up the basket as evidence. Jane hesitated, then opened the door wider. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Davis." "Rachel, please," the redhead insisted, sweeping into the schoolhouse with the confidence of someone who had been there many times. I help with the younger children during reading lessons sometimes. My Thomas is only 3, but he'll be one of your students in a few years." She began unpacking the basket onto one of the student desks: sandwiches, apples, and 2 slices of pie wrapped in cloth. "Nothing fancy, but better than working on an empty stomach. Mind if I join you? I've been dying to meet you since I heard we finally had a new teacher coming." There was something so open and friendly about Rachel Davis that Jane found herself nodding despite her usual caution around strangers. The 2 women sat at adjacent desks, and Rachel chatted easily between bites of her sandwich, requiring little response from Jane beyond occasional nods. "Cherry Creek's growing so fast these days," Rachel said. "The mine's producing well, and they say the railroad might put a spur line through here in the next year or 2. We've got nearly 400 people now. Can you believe it? When James and I arrived 3 years ago, there were barely 100 souls in the whole valley." Jane listened, gradually relaxing as Rachel's friendly chatter continued without any probing questions or uncomfortable observations about Jane's appearance. "Cole Foster stopped by our place this morning," Rachel mentioned casually as they started on their pie. "Said you'd arrived yesterday on the afternoon stage. Cole's a good man, one of the best in these parts. Started his ranch from nothing 5 years back, and now he supplies beef to the whole county." Jane focused on her pie, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "He was fixing the schoolhouse when I arrived this morning. That was kind of him." Rachel smiled. "That's Cole for you, always the first to lend a hand when something needs doing." She took a sip from the canteen she'd brought. "He doesn't say much about his past, but rumor has it he rode with the Texas Rangers for a while before coming west. Would explain why he's so handy with that revolver he carries." Jane glanced up, surprised. "He was a lawman, so they say, though he's never confirmed it. All anyone knows for certain is that he showed up with a handful of cattle, bought that spread out by the creek, and has worked sunrise to sunset ever since." Rachel gathered the remains of their lunch, repacking the basket. "Whatever his past, he's Cherry Creek's most eligible bachelor now, though not for lack of effort from half the unmarried women in the county." Jane felt a flush rising to her cheeks and quickly changed the subject, asking about the children she would be teaching. Rachel seemed to sense her discomfort and obligingly shifted to describing the various families whose children attended the school. After Rachel left, promising to see Jane at the board meeting that afternoon, Jane returned to her preparations with a slightly lighter heart. Perhaps making friends in Cherry Creek wouldn't be as difficult as she had feared. The school board meeting went better than Jane had anticipated. Judge Williams, a stern-faced man with impressive side whiskers, asked a few pointed questions about her teaching methods and experience, but seemed satisfied with her answers. The other board members, Mary Sullivan from the Mercantile, Dr. Parker, who served as the town's physician, and Reverend Holcomb from the small church, were welcoming and enthusiastic about having a teacher with formal training. "The children have been running wild all summer," Mary Sullivan said with a good-natured laugh. "Their parents will be mighty grateful to have someone corralling them again, believe you me." As the meeting concluded, Jane found herself surrounded by well-wishers offering help and advice. The crush of people around her sparked a moment of panic, her breath coming short and quick as the room seemed to close in. A gentle presence at her elbow steadied her. "Folks, let's give Miss Owens some space," came Cole Foster's deep voice. "She's had a long journey and is likely tired." The crowd respectfully stepped back, and Jane shot Cole a grateful glance. He had positioned himself like a buffer between her and the most enthusiastic board members, not touching her, but close enough that his presence created a small bubble of space around her. "Thank you," she murmured as people began to disperse. "No trouble," he replied quietly. "Crowds can be overwhelming, especially when you're new to a place." The simple understanding in his words nearly undid her. Jane blinked rapidly, fighting back unexpected tears. "I should get back to the boarding house," she said, needing to escape before she embarrassed herself. Cole nodded, stepping aside to clear her path to the door. "I'm headed that way myself, if you don't mind the company." Jane hesitated, then nodded. Something about Cole Foster's quiet presence felt safe in a way she couldn't quite explain. They walked together down Cherry Creek's main street, Cole shortening his long strides to match her pace, keeping a respectful distance between them. "The school looks to be in good shape," he commented as they walked. "Roof's sound, windows all intact. The wood stove might need a new pipe before winter, but there's time yet for that." "Yes, it seems very well maintained," Jane agreed, finding it easier to talk about the practical aspects of her new position than anything personal. "Children in these parts don't get many advantages," Cole said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Education is something most of their parents never had. They'll value what you're offering them, even if they don't always show it." Jane glanced at him, curious despite herself. "Did you have schooling, Mr. Foster?" A slight smile curved his mouth. "My mother was determined I'd know my letters and figures, even if we were moving from ranch to ranch with my father's work. She taught me herself until I was 12, then convinced my father to let me stay with my uncle in a town with a proper school for 2 years. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. The past tense hung between them for a moment before Cole continued. "She believed education was the difference between choosing your path in life and having it chosen for you." They had reached the boarding house, and Cole stopped at the bottom of the steps, making no move to follow Jane further. "Thank you for walking with me," Jane said, one hand on the railing. "My pleasure, Miss Owens." Cole tipped his hat. "I'll be bringing some beef to Mrs. Peterson tomorrow morning. If you have a list of supplies you need for the schoolhouse, I'd be happy to pick them up from the mercantile while I'm in town." Jane hesitated, then nodded. "That would be helpful, thank you. Until tomorrow, then." With another tip of his hat, Cole turned and headed back toward the main street, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Jane watched him go, a strange mixture of emotions churning inside her. Gratitude for his kindness, certainly. Wariness born of hard experience with men who presented one face to the world and another in private. But also something else, a fragile curiosity about this quiet cowboy who fixed schoolhouses and defended personal space and spoke of education with unexpected thoughtfulness. That night, as Jane prepared for bed in her small room at the boarding house, she found herself thinking about Cherry Creek and the people she had met. Rachel Davis with her easy friendliness, Mrs. Peterson with her no-nonsense kindness, and Cole Foster with his steady gaze and respectful distance. For the first time since her escape from Denver, Jane allowed herself to consider the possibility of not just surviving, but perhaps, someday, living again. The days leading up to the start of the school term passed in a blur of preparation. Jane spent most of her time at the schoolhouse, organizing books, preparing lessons, and scrubbing desks that, while clean, bore the carved initials and ink stains of generations of students. True to his word, Cole arrived at the boarding house the morning after the board meeting, a list of school supplies in hand. "Anything else you need?" he asked as Jane reviewed what he'd written. "This is more than enough," she assured him, touched by his thoroughness. "The board already approved funds for new readers and chalk." Cole nodded. "I'll be back this afternoon with everything." He was as good as his word. returning in the early evening with a wagon loaded not only with the items on Jane's list, but also with a sturdy bookshelf he had apparently made himself. "Noticed you didn't have enough shelf space for those new readers," he explained as he carried it into the schoolhouse. "Had some lumber left from building new stalls in my barn." Jane ran her hand over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. "This must have taken hours." "You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble." Cole shrugged, setting the shelf against the wall where Jane indicated. "Wasn't any trouble. Gets dark early this time of year, gives me something to do in the evenings besides listen to the coyotes." As the days passed, Jane found herself looking forward to Cole's visits. He never stayed long, never invaded her space or asked uncomfortable questions, but his quiet presence became a reassuring constant in her new life. Sometimes he brought small treasures for the schoolhouse, a magnifying glass for science lessons, a set of carved wooden animals for the younger children, a map of the Nevada territory that he'd ordered from Carson City. Jane learned that Cole's ranch, the Double F, was 5 miles outside of town, where Cherry Creek widened into a small valley before continuing its journey to join the Humboldt River. He raised primarily cattle but also kept horses, some of which he trained and sold to the stage company. "My foreman, Miguel, handles things when I'm away," Cole explained one afternoon as he helped Jane arrange the new readers on the bookshelves. "He's been with me since I started the ranch, knows more about cattle than I ever will." "You seem to be in town often for a rancher," Jane observed, immediately regretting the personal nature of the comment. Cole didn't seem offended. "Ranch is running smooth right now. Miguel and the boys have the fall roundup well in hand." He glanced at her, a hint of humor in his eyes. "Besides, someone needs to make sure our new schoolteacher has what she needs to educate the next generation." His smile made something flutter in Jane's chest, a sensation so long forgotten that she almost didn't recognize it as pleasure. The night before school was to begin, Jane found herself unable to sleep, nervous about facing 23 children the next morning. What if they sensed her weakness? What if they saw through the careful facade she had constructed and glimpsed the broken woman beneath? She rose before dawn and dressed with trembling hands, pinning her light brown hair into a severe bun at the nape of her neck. The woman in the mirror looked pale but determined, with no visible bruises now to betray her past. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "You are not what he made you believe you are." When Jane arrived at the schoolhouse, she was startled to find Cole Foster standing on the porch, a small package in his hands. "Thought you might need this for your first day," he said, holding out the package. "For luck." Inside was a small brass bell polished to a high shine. "For calling the children in from recess," Cole explained, "and for ringing on the first day of school, it's tradition." Jane's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, it's perfect." Cole glanced at the sky, which was beginning to lighten with dawn. "I'll leave you to prepare. Those children will be here before you know it." He hesitated, then added, "You'll do fine, Miss Owens. Those kids are lucky to have you." As he turned to go, Jane surprised herself by calling after him. "Mr. Foster," he paused, looking back over his shoulder. Would you like to come to the schoolhouse on Friday afternoon? I thought perhaps you could tell the children about ranching as part of their lessons on local occupations." The smile that spread across Cole's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd be honored, Miss Owens. Friday afternoon it is." When the children arrived, filing into the schoolhouse with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, Jane's nervousness transformed into a familiar sense of purpose. These were children who needed what she could give them: knowledge, guidance, the tools to shape their own futures. She rang Cole's bell to formally begin the school day. and as the clear sound echoed through the room, Jane felt something shift within her. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by her fear or her past. Here in this schoolhouse, she was Miss Owens, teacher and guide, respected for her mind rather than judged for her failings. The first week of school passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jane quickly came to know her students, from 6-year-old Tommy Sullivan with his missing front teeth and boundless enthusiasm, to 15-year-old Sarah Jenkins, who helped her father in the assay office and had a remarkable head for mathematics. On Friday afternoon, Cole arrived at the schoolhouse as promised, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he faced the room full of curious children. "Mr. Foster has kindly agreed to tell us about ranching," Jane announced to her class. As we discussed in our geography lesson, ranching is one of the most important activities in the Nevada Territory. Cole cleared his throat and began to speak, his deep voice quickly capturing the children's attention. He explained the seasonal cycle of ranch work, from spring calving to fall roundup, described the various roles on a ranch from cowboys to cooks, and even demonstrated how to throw a lasso using a coil of rope he had brought. The children were enthralled, peppering Cole with questions that he answered with patience and often humor. Jane watched from her desk, struck by the natural way he interacted with the students, never talking down to them or dismissing their curiosity. When school ended for the day, the children filed out, many stopping to thank Cole for his presentation. After the last student had left, Cole lingered, helping Jane straighten the desks and close the windows against the evening chill. "You're good with them," Jane observed, gathering papers from her desk. "Kids are easy," Cole replied with a slight shrug. "They say what they mean and mean what they say. It's adults who complicate things." Jane glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. "Yes, I suppose that's true. Some of us try to keep things simple, though," Cole said quietly. He hesitated, then continued. "Miss Owens, Jane, would you allow me to escort you to the harvest dance next Saturday? The town holds it every year to celebrate the end of summer." Jane froze, panic fluttering in her chest. A dance meant crowds, meant physical contact, meant expectations she wasn't ready to meet. I don't think." Cole held up a hand. "Just as friends," he clarified quickly. "No expectations. We could go for an hour, and if you're uncomfortable, I'll walk you straight home." Jane studied him, searching for any sign of the entitlement or manipulation she had come to associate with men. She found none, just open honesty in his steady gaze. "I haven't been to a dance in a very long time," she said slowly. "I'm not sure I remember how." "Fortunately, I'm a patient teacher," Cole replied with a gentle smile. "And Cherry Creek's version of dancing is pretty forgiving, mostly just not stepping on your partner's toes." A small laugh escaped Jane, surprising her. "In that case, I accept, but just for an hour." Cole's smile broadened. "I'll pick you up at the boarding house at 7, and Jane, thank you for trusting me that much." As Cole left the schoolhouse, Jane realized he was right. She had trusted him, at least a little. The knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. The evening of the harvest dance, Jane stood in front of her small mirror, smoothing the front of her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Peterson had helped her arrange her hair, insisting that a dance called for something more festive than her usual severe bun. The result was softer, with a few curls framing her face. Jane barely recognized herself. The bruises had faded completely now, and 6 weeks of Mrs. Peterson's cooking had filled out her gaunt cheeks. The haunted look in her eyes had receded, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. When Cole arrived at the boarding house, his reaction to her appearance made Jane blush for the first time in years. He didn't say anything flowery or excessive, just a simple, "You look beautiful, Jane," spoken with such sincerity that she couldn't doubt he meant it. Cole himself had clearly made an effort for the occasion. His usual dusty work clothes had been replaced by clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that showed his broad shoulders to advantage. His brown hair was neatly combed, still damp from a recent washing. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his arm but leaving enough space that Jane didn't feel trapped or pressured. The town hall had been transformed for the dance, with lanterns hanging from the rafters, tables laden with food along one wall, and an area cleared for dancing. A small group of musicians played on a raised platform at one end, a fiddle, banjo, and harmonica, creating lively music that already had several couples circling the floor. Jane tensed as they entered the crowded room, instinctively moving closer to Cole's solid presence. He glanced down at her, concern evident in his eyes. "We can leave any time you say," he reminded her gently. "Why don't we start by getting some punch?" Cole guided her through the crowd, subtly positioning himself to shield Jane from the press of bodies. At the punch table, they encountered Rachel Davis, resplendent in a green dress that complemented her red hair. "Jane, you came," Rachel exclaimed, her face lighting up. "And with Cole, no less. Half the women in town will be green with envy." Jane felt herself blushing again. "Mr. Foster was kind enough to escort me," she said formally. Rachel raised an eyebrow, glancing between them with a knowing smile. "Of course he was. Cole's nothing if not a gentleman." She turned to include Cole in the conversation. "James is over by the door, talking with Judge Williams. Something about organizing a town council meeting about the railroad rumors." Cole nodded. "I heard the survey team is expected next month. Could mean big changes for Cherry Creek if they decide to put a station here." As they chatted, Jane gradually relaxed, sipping her punch and observing the dancers. Many of her students were there with their families, and they waved excitedly when they spotted their teacher. "Would you like to dance?" Cole asked after a while, carefully casual. "Or would you prefer to watch a bit longer?" Jane hesitated, then set down her punch cup. "I think I'd like to try dancing, but I wasn't joking about being rusty." "Neither was I about being patient," Cole replied with a warm smile, offering his hand. Jane took it, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. The touch of his hand on hers sent a shock of awareness through her body, not fear, as she had expected, but a tingling warmth that spread up her arm. The musicians were playing a simple waltz, and Cole guided Jane into the steps with gentle confidence. He was an excellent dancer, moving with the same fluid grace he showed on horseback. His hand at her waist was respectful, barely touching, and he maintained a proper distance between their bodies. "See, you remember perfectly well," Cole said as they completed a turn without mishap. Jane found herself smiling up at him, momentarily forgetting her usual caution. "Perhaps it's the quality of my partner." "I'll take that compliment," Cole replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Though I suspect you're being generous." They danced 3 dances in succession, each one easier than the last as Jane's confidence grew. When the musicians paused for a break, Cole led her to a quieter corner of the hall where they could catch their breath. "Having second thoughts about that 1-hour limit?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice. Jane realized with surprise that she was genuinely enjoying herself. "Perhaps we could stay a bit longer," she conceded. The evening continued, a blur of dancing and conversation and more laughter than Jane had experienced in years. Cole introduced her to more of Cherry Creek's residents, always staying close enough that she felt secure but never hovering or controlling. When midnight approached and the dance began to wind down, Jane was surprised to find she was reluctant for the evening to end. As Cole walked her back to the boarding house, the night air cool against her flushed skin, she felt a curious lightness in her chest. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached the porch. "I enjoyed myself much more than I expected to." "High praise indeed," Cole replied with a smile. "Maybe next time you'll expect to enjoy yourself from the start." "Next time." "The Founders' Day celebration is next month," Cole said, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "I thought maybe if you were willing." "Yes," Jane said simply. "I'd like that." Cole's smile was like sunrise again, transforming his serious face. "Good night, Jane. Sleep well." "Good night, Cole." As Jane watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually fading into the darkness, she realized something had fundamentally shifted between them tonight. He was no longer just Mr. Foster, the kind rancher who helped with the schoolhouse, and she was no longer just Miss Owens, the cautious new teacher. They were becoming something else, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. October brought cooler temperatures to Cherry Creek, the aspens in the surrounding mountains turning gold against the dark pines. Jane settled into a routine at the schoolhouse, finding unexpected fulfillment in the daily challenges of teaching children of varying ages and abilities. The nightmares that had plagued her since her escape from Denver grew less frequent, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Cole became a regular visitor at the schoolhouse, often stopping by on his way to or from town. Sometimes he brought small repairs, fixing a loose floorboard or a sticking window, and other times he simply came to talk, sitting on the steps as Jane finished her day's preparations, telling her stories about life on the ranch or asking about her students' progress. Jane found herself looking forward to these visits, to the quiet moments of conversation that gradually built a foundation of friendship, unlike anything she had experienced before. Cole never pushed or pressed, never made her feel that she owed him anything for his kindness. He simply offered his presence, his assistance, and increasingly his friendship. One crisp afternoon in late October, Jane dismissed her students early so she could attend a teachers' meeting in the neighboring town of Elko. As the children scattered into the afternoon sunshine, she was surprised to see Cole riding up on his big bay gelding. "I heard you were heading to Elko for a meeting," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "Thought you might like some company on the ride. It's a good hour by wagon, and the days are getting shorter." Jane hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be nice, thank you. I just need to gather my notes." Cole waited patiently as Jane locked up the schoolhouse, then helped her into the small wagon that the town council had provided for her use. As they set off toward Elko, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sagebrush-dotted landscape, Jane found herself relaxing into the companionable silence between them. "You've changed since you arrived," Cole observed after a while, his eyes on the road ahead. Jane glanced at him, uncertain how to respond. "That first day, you looked like you expected the world to collapse around you at any moment," Cole continued, his voice gentle. "Now you walk through town with your head up, you laugh with your students, you dance at harvest festivals." Jane looked down at her gloved hands, folded in her lap. "I feel safer here," she admitted. "Cherry Creek has been kinder than I expected." "People can sense goodness in others," Cole said. "And strength. You have both in abundance." Jane shook her head slightly. "I don't feel strong. Most days I still feel like I'm one loud noise away from shattering completely." "That's not weakness, Jane. That's surviving." Cole's voice had roughened slightly. "Whatever happened to you before you came here, whatever put those bruises on your skin and that fear in your eyes, you survived it. You got away, you started over. That takes more courage than most people will ever know." Jane felt tears pricking at the back of her eyes. "How can you be so certain? You don't know what I've done, what mistakes I've made. I know enough, Cole said simply. I know you're kind to children who others might consider troublesome. I know you spend extra time with Tommy Sullivan because his reading lags behind the others, and you don't want him to feel ashamed. I know you slip food to the Wilson children when you think no one is looking, because their father drinks his wages and their mother can't make ends meet. Jane stared at him, startled by his observations. I see you, Jane Owens, Cole said, finally turning to meet her gaze directly. Not just the parts you want people to see, but the whole of you. And what I see is someone I admire more with each passing day. The tears Jane had been holding back spilled over, tracking silently down her cheeks. Cole didn't try to touch her or offer platitudes. He simply gave her the space to feel, to absorb his words. When Jane finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My husband beat me. For 3 years he hurt me in ways I didn't know one person could hurt another. And when I finally found the courage to leave him to file for divorce, he swore he would find me. Cole's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice remained steady. Is that why you came to Cherry Creek? You're hiding from him, Jane nodded. The judge granted the divorce, but Richard. He doesn't accept it. In his mind, I'm still his property to do with as he pleases. She drew a shaky breath. I stole money from his safe to pay for my escape. If he finds me, he'll kill me. He promised he would. He won't find you, Cole said with quiet certainty. And if by some chance he did, he would never reach you. I give you my word on that, Jane. Something in his tone made Jane look at him sharply. His face had hardened, the gentle rancher momentarily replaced by someone else, someone with steel in his spine and flint in his eyes. You can't promise that, Jane said softly. I can, Cole replied, his voice leaving no room for doubt. And I do. They rode the rest of the way to Elko in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jane felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The secret she had been carrying alone now shared. The burden halved. During the teachers' meeting, Jane found it difficult to concentrate on the discussion of curriculum standards and teaching methods. Her mind kept returning to the conversation with Cole, to the look in his eyes when he had promised to protect her. On the ride back to Cherry Creek, with the stars emerging in the clear evening sky, Cole spoke of other things, his plans for expanding the ranch, a new foal that had been born the previous week, the book he was reading in the evenings. He didn't press Jane for more details about her past, didn't treat her differently for having revealed her secret. When they reached the boarding house, Cole helped Jane down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close together in the darkness, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Thank you, Jane said quietly, not just for the ride but for listening, for not judging. There's nothing to judge, Jane. Cole's voice was low and certain. You survived. You rebuilt. Those aren't failings, they're triumphs. On impulse, Jane reached out and touched his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. Good night, Cole. His fingers curled gently around hers, a brief, tender pressure. Good night, Jane. Sleep well. As Jane watched him drive away toward his ranch outside of town, she realized that for the first time since her escape, she felt not just safe but seen. Cole Foster looked at her and didn't see a victim or a broken woman. He saw strength, courage, goodness. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see those things in herself as well. November brought the first snow to Cherry Creek, transforming the dusty mining town into a wonderland of white. The children were ecstatic, bursting out of the schoolhouse at recess to throw snowballs and build lopsided snowmen in the yard. Jane found herself enjoying the season more than she had in years. The boarding house was cozy and warm, with Mrs. Peterson's cooking filling the rooms with delicious smells. The town was preparing for Thanksgiving, with the church organizing a community dinner for those without family nearby. Cole continued to be a steady presence in Jane's life, often appearing with practical gifts for the coming winter: a better stove for the schoolhouse, warm mittens for the children who didn't have them, a heavy woolen shawl for Jane that he claimed his housekeeper had made, but that looked suspiciously new. Their friendship deepened with each passing week. Jane learned that Cole had indeed been a Texas Ranger before coming west, though he spoke little about that time in his life. He had grown up on various ranches across Texas as his father moved from job to job, developing a love for the land and animals that eventually led him to purchase his own spread in Nevada. "Why Cherry Creek?" Jane asked one evening as they sat in Mrs. Peterson's parlor, a checkers board between them. "You could have ranched anywhere." Cole moved one of his pieces before answering. "Rode through here once, years back, when it was hardly more than a camp. Something about the valley spoke to me, the way the mountains cradle it, the creek running clear and steady year-round. When I was ready to put down roots, I remembered this place." Jane studied the board, moving one of her red pieces. "And you never regretted it, being so far from everything?" Cole's eyes met hers over the checkers board, warm and steady. "Never, especially not now." The simple statement made Jane's heart beat faster. She looked down, focusing on the game to hide the flush she could feel spreading across her cheeks. As Thanksgiving approached, the town buzzed with preparations for the holiday. Jane's students made paper decorations for the church hall where the community dinner would be held, and Mrs. Peterson enlisted Jane's help in baking pies for the occasion. 2 days before Thanksgiving, a vicious storm blew in from the northwest, bringing howling winds and heavy snow that quickly piled into drifts. School was canceled, with most families choosing to stay close to home until the weather cleared. Jane was helping Mrs. Peterson inventory pantry supplies when a pounding on the boarding house door startled them both. Mrs. Peterson hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Cole, snow crusting his hat and shoulders, his face red from the biting wind. "Cole Foster, what on earth are you doing out in this weather?" Mrs. Peterson scolded, ushering him toward the kitchen stove. "You'll catch your death." "Sorry for the intrusion, ladies," Cole said, removing his hat and shaking the snow from it. "But I wanted to make sure you had enough firewood laid by. This storm's worse than expected and might last through Thanksgiving." "We're well supplied, thank you," Mrs. Peterson assured him, pouring a cup of coffee and pressing it into his cold hands. "But you shouldn't have risked the journey from your ranch in this weather." "I was already in town when it hit," Cole explained, gratefully sipping the hot coffee. "Delivering beef for the Thanksgiving dinner. Decided to wait it out at the hotel rather than try to make it back to the ranch." Jane had been watching Cole with concern, noting the fatigue etched on his face. "You look exhausted. How long were you out in the storm?" "Long enough," Cole admitted with a rueful smile. "Helped the Wilsons get their roof patched before the worst hit, then checked on a few of the older folks who live alone." Of course he had, Jane thought. That was who Cole Foster was, a man who thought of others before himself, who would ride through a blizzard to ensure the vulnerable were safe. "You'll stay for supper," Mrs. Peterson declared, brooking no argument. "And I won't hear any protests about imposing. It's the least we can do after you've been playing guardian angel all over town." Cole looked as if he might object, but a particularly fierce gust of wind rattled the windows, and he nodded instead. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you." Supper that evening was a cozy affair, with Mrs. Peterson serving a hearty stew and fresh bread. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, listening to the storm rage outside while discussing plans for the community Thanksgiving dinner, assuming the weather cleared in time. After the meal, Mrs. Peterson excused herself, claiming fatigue, though Jane suspected the older woman was deliberately giving her and Cole some privacy. They moved to the parlor, where a cheerful fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "This reminds me of when I was a boy in Texas," Cole said, settling into an armchair near the fire. "We'd get blue northers that would sweep down from the plains, turning the world white overnight. My mother would gather us around the fireplace and tell stories until we fell asleep." Jane smiled, curled in her own chair with a quilt over her lap. "What kind of stories?" "All kinds. Adventures, myths, Bible stories." Cole's expression softened with memory. "But my favorites were the ones she made up herself, tales about brave horses and the children who loved them, magical mountains that hid treasures, stars that came down to earth disguised as fireflies." "She sounds wonderful," Jane said softly. "She was." Cole stared into the fire, his expression distant. "She died when I was 15, influenza. My father was never the same after. Started drinking, moving us from ranch to ranch as he got hired and fired. I joined the Rangers as soon as I was old enough, partly to get away from watching him destroy himself." Jane hesitated, then asked, "Is he still alive, your father?" Cole shook his head. "Died in a bar fight in El Paso 10 years ago. I got the telegram a week later." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry, didn't mean to turn the evening melancholy." "Don't apologize," Jane said. "I like learning about you, about what made you the man you are now." Cole's eyes met hers, something vulnerable in their depths. "And what kind of man is that, Jane?" She didn't hesitate. "A good one. The best I've known." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to voice aloud. After a moment, Cole stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to peer into the swirling darkness outside. "Storm's not letting up," he observed. "I should go before it gets any worse. The hotel's only a few blocks away." Jane rose as well, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Be careful, please." Cole turned back to her, his expression softening. "Always am." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and when Jane didn't tense or pull away, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Happy Thanksgiving, Jane. I'll see you at the community dinner, weather permitting." "Happy Thanksgiving, Cole." After he had gone, bundled against the storm with promises to Mrs. Peterson that he would be careful, Jane remained in the parlor, watching the fire and thinking about the man who had just left, about his kindness and his strength, about the way he made her feel both protected and respected, never smothered or controlled. For the first time in years, Jane allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than just survival, a future with companionship, with joy, with love. The possibility both terrified and exhilarated her. The storm eventually passed, leaving Cherry Creek buried under nearly 2 feet of snow but otherwise unharmed. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. The community dinner at the church hall was a joyous affair, with long tables groaning under the weight of roast turkey, ham, and all the traditional fixings. Nearly the entire town turned out, miners and merchants, ranchers and railroaders, all setting aside their differences to break bread together in gratitude. Cole found Jane soon after she arrived, his face lighting up at the sight of her in a russet-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson had insisted on lending her for the occasion. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm to escort her to one of the tables. They sat together, surrounded by Jane's students and their families, all eager to share their holiday with their beloved teacher. Jane found herself laughing more than she had in years, caught up in the genuine warmth and fellowship that permeated the gathering. After the meal, as people lingered over pie and coffee, Sheriff Davis stood to make the traditional Thanksgiving toast. "To Cherry Creek," he said, raising his cup. "May our town continue to prosper, and may we always remember that our greatest wealth lies not in silver or gold, but in the bonds we share with one another." "Hear, hear," came the response from around the hall, cups and glasses raising in agreement. As Jane raised her own cup, she caught Cole watching her, his expression so tender that it made her breath catch. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, holding her gaze with a steady warmth that spoke of feelings too deep for casual conversation. In that moment, surrounded by the community that had taken her in without question, seated beside the man who had shown her that not all men brought pain and fear, Jane felt something click into place inside her, a sense of belonging, of home, that she had thought forever lost to her. Later, as Cole walked her back to the boarding house through the snow-covered streets, Jane gathered her courage and slipped her hand into his. Cole's fingers curled around hers, warm and strong, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The simple connection of their joined hands said everything that mattered. When they reached the boarding house, Cole turned to face her, still holding her hand. "Jane," he began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Yes," she prompted softly. Cole took a deep breath. "I'm not a man who believes in rushing things, especially not with someone who's been hurt the way you have." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "But I need you to know that my feelings for you run deeper than friendship. Much deeper." Jane's heart raced, a mixture of fear and hope making her dizzy. "Cole, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just wanted you to know where I stand, that I care for you deeply. That I will continue to care for you, whether or not you ever feel the same." Jane studied his face in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the kind eyes, the mouth that so rarely smiled but that did so now, gently, patiently. This was a man who had never given her reason to fear, who had respected her boundaries from the first moment they met, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and never once used that vulnerability against her. "I do," she whispered. "Feel the same, I mean." Cole's expression transformed, hope and joy lighting his features. "Jane, I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Not of you, never of you, but of trusting these feelings, of believing I could be happy again." "We'll take it slow," Cole promised, his voice husky with emotion. "Day by day, no expectations, no pressure, just us finding our way together." Jane nodded, her eyes filling with tears that, for once, weren't born of sorrow. "I'd like that." Cole raised his free hand, slowly enough that Jane could have moved away if she wished, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "May I kiss you, Jane? Just once, to seal this promise between us." Jane had thought the question would trigger fear, memories of unwanted touches and demands. Instead, she felt only a sweet anticipation, a longing to be closer to this man who had shown her what real gentleness looked like. "Yes," she whispered. Cole leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. His hand cradled her cheek as if she were something infinitely precious, and Jane found herself leaning into his touch, into the warmth and safety he offered. When they parted, Cole pressed his forehead gently to hers. "Thank you," he murmured, "for trusting me with your heart. I promise to guard it carefully." Jane smiled up at him, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Good night, Cole. Good night, Jane. Sweet dreams." As she watched him walk away, snow crunching beneath his boots, Jane touched her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. For the first time since her escape, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps the future held not just safety, but joy. Winter settled over Cherry Creek with a quiet intensity. The days short and cold, the nights long and often filled with stars of breathtaking clarity. Life in the small mining town slowed to a more deliberate pace, with many of the mines operating on reduced schedules and travel to the outside world becoming more difficult as snow regularly blocked the mountain passes. Jane's relationship with Cole deepened as the weeks passed, their courtship conducted with a tenderness and patience that gave Jane time to heal, to learn to trust again. Cole never pushed, never rushed, always letting Jane set the pace of their growing intimacy. They spent evenings at the boarding house, playing checkers or reading together in the parlor, while Mrs. Peterson pretended not to watch them with approving eyes. On Sundays after church, weather permitting, Cole would take Jane for rides in his sleigh, wrapped in thick buffalo robes against the cold, exploring the winter beauty of the valley. Christmas approached, bringing with it a flurry of preparations. Jane's students were practicing a pageant to perform for the town, and the schoolhouse rang with carols and excited chatter. Cole helped Jane decorate the schoolhouse, hanging garlands and setting up a small tree in the corner that the children adorned with handmade ornaments. "Did you have Christmas trees when you were a child?" Jane asked as they worked, curious about Cole's past. "Some years," Cole replied, securing the tree in its stand. "When we were settled somewhere. My mother always made sure we had something special, even if it was just a branch with a ribbon on it." He smiled at the memory. "She believed in making celebrations out of whatever we had, however humble." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Jane said, not for the first time. "She would have liked you," Cole said, his expression softening. "Strong, kind, resilient, you remind me of her in many ways." The comparison touched Jane deeply. "I wish I could have met her. So do I." Cole finished with the tree and stepped back to admire their work. "What about your family, Jane? You've never spoken much about them." Jane hesitated, then decided that if she trusted Cole with her future, she could trust him with her past as well. "My parents died when I was 16, a fire in our home in Illinois. I was away, staying with a school friend when it happened." Cole's expression filled with compassion. "I'm sorry, Jane. That must have been devastating." Jane nodded, focusing on arranging a garland to avoid meeting his eyes. "It was. I had no other family, so I went to live with my friend's family until I was old enough to attend normal school and get my teaching certificate." "Is that how you ended up in Denver?" "Yes. I taught at a small school outside the city for a year before I met Richard." Jane's hand stilled on the garland. "He seemed so charming, so refined. He courted me with poetry and flowers, took me to the opera, made me feel special. I was so naive." Cole moved closer, not touching her but offering his presence as support. "You weren't naive, Jane. You were trusting, as you had every right to be. He was the one who broke that trust." Jane looked up at him, struck again by the fundamental decency that defined Cole Foster. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" Cole smiled, a hint of self-deprecation in his expression. "Trust me, I don't. I just try to speak the truth as I see it." He reached out slowly, giving Jane time to move away if she wished, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And the truth as I see it is that you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Jane leaned into his touch, no longer fearing the contact. "Thank you for seeing me that way, even when I can't see it myself." Cole's fingers lingered at her cheek. "One day you'll see yourself as I do. Until then, I'll just have to remind you." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Jane's students, bursting into the schoolhouse in a flurry of excitement and noise. Cole stepped back, giving Jane space to greet her class, but the warmth in his eyes stayed with her throughout the day. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed Cherry Creek into a scene from a fairy tale, every building and tree draped in white. The entire town gathered at the church for the children's pageant, followed by carols and a simple service led by Reverend Holcomb. Jane sat beside Cole in the packed church, their shoulders touching, her heart full as she watched her students perform the nativity story with earnest enthusiasm. When Tommy Sullivan forgot his lines as a shepherd, Cole leaned forward and whispered the words just loud enough for the boy to hear, earning a grateful smile from both Tommy and Jane. After the service, as people dispersed to their homes for Christmas Eve celebrations, Cole walked Jane back to the boarding house, the night silent around them except for the crunch of snow beneath their boots. "I have something for you," Cole said as they reached the porch. "For Christmas." From inside his coat, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. Jane took it, surprised by the weight of it. "You shouldn't have." "I wanted to," Cole interrupted gently. "Open it." Jane carefully untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound book. Opening it, she gasped softly. It was a collection of poems by Emily Dickinson, the same ones that had been in the book her mother had given her, the one she had brought with her from Denver. "How did you know?" she asked, looking up at Cole in wonder. "I saw you reading it one evening," Cole admitted. "The binding was falling apart, and I noticed how carefully you turned the pages, how you'd mended it with thread. I thought you might like a new copy, not to replace the one that means so much to you, but to accompany it." Tears filled Jane's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect. Thank you." "Merry Christmas, Jane," Cole said softly. "I have something for you too," Jane said, suddenly remembering the package waiting inside. "Wait here." She hurried inside and returned moments later with a parcel wrapped in butcher paper. "It's not much," she warned as she handed it to Cole. Cole unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Did you make this?" he asked, running his fingers over the soft wool. Jane nodded. "Mrs. Peterson taught me. I've been working on it in the evenings when you weren't visiting." "It's beautiful," Cole said, immediately wrapping it around his neck, "and perfect timing with this cold snap." His eyes met hers, warm with affection. "Thank you, Jane. This means more to me than you know." They stood together on the porch, the night still and perfect around them, snowflakes beginning to drift down again from the dark sky. "May I kiss you, Jane?" Cole asked softly, as he always did, never presuming, always giving her the choice. "Yes," Jane whispered, stepping closer to him. Cole's arms encircled her gently, drawing her against his chest as his lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of tenderness and reverence and deepening love. Jane's arms wound around his neck, the book of poems still clutched in one hand, as she returned his kiss with growing confidence. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Cole brushed a snowflake from Jane's cheek. "Merry Christmas, Jane." "Merry Christmas, Cole." As Jane watched him walk away through the falling snow, she hugged the book of poems to her chest, marveling at how much her life had changed in the months since she had arrived in Cherry Creek. The frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with downcast eyes and hidden bruises seemed like someone from another lifetime, a ghost gradually fading as Jane reclaimed her true self. Winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Cherry Creek came alive with renewed energy as the passes cleared and travel became easier, bringing fresh supplies and news from the outside world. Jane's school thrived, her students showing remarkable progress under her patient guidance. She had become a beloved figure in the community, respected for her intelligence and kindness, no longer defined by the shadows in her past. Her relationship with Cole continued to deepen, their love growing stronger with each passing day. They still moved slowly, respecting Jane's need to heal completely before taking more significant steps, but there was no doubt in either of their minds about the direction they were heading. April brought unexpected news that sent a ripple of excitement through the town. The railroad survey team had decided that Cherry Creek would indeed be the site of a new station on the line being built to connect the mining regions of Nevada with the main transcontinental railroad. "It'll change everything," Cole observed as he and Jane walked along the creek one warm Sunday afternoon. "More people, more businesses. Cherry Creek could become a real city in a few years." "Are you worried about how it might affect your ranch?" Jane asked, her hand comfortably nestled in his. Cole considered the question. "Not worried exactly. The double F is far enough out that we'll still have our peace and quiet, but it'll be good for business, having easier ways to ship cattle to market." He glanced at her. "What about you? Are you concerned about how it might change the school?" Jane shook her head. "More families will mean more children to teach. I see that as a good thing." She smiled. "Though I might need an assistant if the numbers grow too much." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the creek as it wound through stands of aspens just beginning to leaf out. When they reached a small clearing where wildflowers were starting to bloom, Cole stopped and turned to face Jane. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," he said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. Jane felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes." Cole took both her hands in his expression serious but tender. "Jane, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up each morning grateful that you're in my world, and go to sleep each night thinking of your smile." Jane's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. "I know we've moved slowly, and I'm grateful for the time we've had to truly know each other," Cole continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "But I find myself wanting a future where we build something lasting together." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "Jane Owens, I love you with all that I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Cole opened the box to reveal a ring, not an ostentatious diamond like the one Richard had given her, but a simple gold band set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires that matched the color of her eyes. Jane looked from the ring to Cole's face, seeing there all the love and respect and tenderness that had healed her broken heart over the past months. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." Cole's face broke into that rare, transformative smile that Jane had come to treasure. With hands that trembled slightly, he slid the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I promise to spend every day making you happy," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "To protect you, to respect you, to love you as you deserve to be loved." Jane stepped closer, raising her hand to his cheek. "You already do all those things, Cole Foster. That's why I love you." Cole's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest as he kissed her with a passionate tenderness that spoke of both restrained desire and profound respect. Jane melted into his embrace, no longer afraid of being held, of being touched, of being loved. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. "When would you like to be married?" Jane considered the question. "Soon," she decided. "Not a long engagement, but I would like to finish the school term first. I owe that to my students." "The first week of June, then," Cole suggested. "After the school year ends, June would be perfect," Jane agreed, looking down at the ring that now graced her finger, a symbol not of ownership, as her first wedding ring had been, but of partnership, of mutual respect and love. They walked back toward town hand in hand, stopping occasionally to share kisses and whispered promises. When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Peterson took one look at them and burst into tears of joy, declaring that she had known from the first day that they were meant for each other. News of their engagement spread quickly through Cherry Creek, with friends and neighbors stopping by to offer congratulations. Rachel Davis immediately appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, brimming with ideas for the ceremony and celebration. That night, as Jane prepared for bed in her room at the boarding house, she stood before the small mirror, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened, broken creature who had arrived in Cherry Creek less than a year ago. This woman had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. This woman stood straight and tall. This woman was loved and loving in return. Jane touched the ring on her finger, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. When she had fled Denver, her only hope had been survival, her only goal to disappear somewhere her husband would never find her. Instead, she had found not just safety but salvation, not just refuge but renewal, not just a place to hide but a place to belong. As Jane closed her eyes that night, her dreams were filled not with the nightmares of the past, but with visions of the future, a future with Cole, with love, with the happiness she had once believed forever lost to her. Spring advanced into early summer, the valley around Cherry Creek turning lush and green. Jane's students grew increasingly excited as the end of the school year approached, not just because of the freedom of summer, but because the entire town was buzzing with preparations for their beloved teacher's wedding. The date was set for the first Saturday in June, with the ceremony to be held in the church, followed by a celebration in the town square that promised to be the social event of the year. Rachel Davis organized committees for food, decorations, and music, while Mrs. Peterson took charge of the wedding cake, declaring that no one else would be trusted with such an important task. Jane found herself swept up in the community's enthusiasm, touched by how thoroughly Cherry Creek had embraced her as one of their own. Cole's ranch hands, led by his foreman Miguel, were building a special platform in the town square where the newlyweds would have their first dance, while the town's miners pooled funds to hire a proper band from Elko. Amidst the happy preparations, Jane received an unexpected letter that arrived on the stagecoach 2 weeks before the wedding. The Denver postmark made her hands shake as she opened it, fearing that somehow Richard had discovered her whereabouts. Instead, the letter was from Richard's sister, Elizabeth, a quiet woman who had shown Jane kindness during her marriage but had been powerless to intervene in her brother's abuse. "Dear Jane," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well and safe wherever you have gone. I write with news that I believe will bring you peace of mind. Richard was killed in a confrontation at his bank 3 weeks ago. A disgruntled investor who had lost everything shot him before taking his own life. I know the pain my brother caused you, though I was too cowardly to stand against him while you suffered. For that, I will always carry shame, but I wanted you to know that you are truly free now. You need no longer look over your shoulder or fear his pursuit. The authorities searched for you after his death as his widow and heir, but I told them you had gone to Europe to visit distant relatives. I don't know where you actually are, and I don't need to know. This letter is being sent to multiple post offices in towns west of Denver in hopes that it might reach you. Be happy, Jane. Live the life you deserve. And please know that at least one member of the Owens family recognized your worth and grieved for your suffering. With sincere regret and best wishes, Elizabeth Owens." Jane sat heavily on her bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Richard was dead. The threat she had lived with for months, The fear that had haunted the edges of even her happiest moments with Cole was gone forever. She felt no joy at the news of Richard's death. She had moved beyond hatred into something like pity for the man whose rage and need for control had poisoned not just her life but his own. But the relief that washed over her was profound. A final weight lifted from her shoulders. When Cole arrived that evening for their usual dinner at the boarding house, Jane showed him the letter. He read it carefully, his expression solemn, then looked up at her with understanding in his eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked simply. Jane considered the question. "Free," she said finally. "Completely free for the first time in years. Not just physically safe, but released from the fear that's been my constant companion." Cole nodded, taking her hand in his. "I'm grateful you'll never have to look over your shoulder again. That our life together can begin without that shadow hanging over us." "Our life together," Jane repeated, savoring the words. "I can hardly believe it's real sometimes that I found you, that you love me, that we're going to build a future together." "Believe it," Cole said, raising her hand to his lips. "It's the most real thing I've ever known." The evening before their wedding, Cole took Jane for a drive to show her something he had been working on in secret. They traveled the familiar road out of Cherry Creek toward the Double F Ranch. But instead of continuing to the main house, Cole turned onto a smaller track that wound up a gentle hill overlooking the valley. There, nestled among a grove of aspens, stood a newly built house not large but beautifully crafted, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and sides, large windows to capture the spectacular view, and a stone chimney promising warmth in winter. "Cole," Jane breathed as he helped her down from the wagon. "What is this?" "Our home," Cole said simply, his eyes watching her face for her reaction. "If you like it, that is. I wanted you to have a place that was just ours, not the main ranch house with all its history before you. Somewhere we could start fresh together." Jane walked slowly up the path to the porch, overwhelmed by the thought and care evident in every detail. The railing was smooth beneath her hand as she climbed the steps, the boards of the porch solid and even. Cole followed, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "I can change anything you don't like, or if you'd prefer to live in town, closer to the school, it's perfect," Jane interrupted, turning to face him with tears of joy in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect, Cole. I can't believe you did all this without me knowing." Relief and pleasure spread across Cole's face. "I had help. Miguel and the boys did most of the work when they weren't needed at the ranch, and Rachel kept you busy with wedding preparations whenever I needed to slip away to check on progress." Jane laughed, imagining the conspiracy that must have unfolded behind her back. "So that's why she suddenly needed my opinion on every detail of the celebration." "Guilty as charged," Cole admitted with a smile. "Would you like to see inside?" The interior of the house was as thoughtfully designed as the exterior, with a large, bright kitchen, a cozy sitting room centered around a stone fireplace, and a study with empty bookshelves waiting to be filled. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, a master bedroom with a view of the mountains, and 2 smaller rooms that Cole explained could one day be nurseries if Jane wanted children. "If we want children," Jane corrected gently, taking his hand. "This will be our decision together. Just as this is our home together." Cole's expression softened with love. "Together," he agreed. "Everything from now on, we decide together." As they stood in what would soon be their bedroom, Jane turned to Cole with a surge of confidence that surprised even her. Rising on tiptoe, she kissed him with more passion than she had allowed herself to show before, her arms winding around his neck. Cole responded with careful restraint at first, then with growing ardor as Jane pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "One more day," he murmured, his voice husky with desire. "One more day, and I can show you properly how much I love you." Jane smiled, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had waited so patiently, who had never pushed, who had allowed her to find her way back to trust at her own pace. "One more day," she agreed. "And then forever." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the June sun warming Cherry Creek as the town came alive with excitement. Rachel arrived at the boarding house early to help Jane prepare, bringing with her a crown of wildflowers to complement the simple white dress that Mary Sullivan had helped Jane make. "Cole won't know what hit him when he sees you," Rachel declared as she arranged Jane's hair, letting it fall in soft waves rather than the severe bun she usually wore for teaching. "You're absolutely radiant." Jane studied her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The woman looking back at her seemed years younger than the one who had arrived in Cherry Creek, the shadows gone from her eyes, replaced by a glow of happiness that no cosmetic could replicate. "It's hard to believe how much has changed in less than a year," Jane said softly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so broken, so afraid. And now look at you," Rachel said, placing the wildflower crown carefully on Jane's head. "About to marry the best man in Nevada territory and begin a new life filled with love and respect. He is the best man, isn't he?" Jane said, smiling at the thought of Cole. "Without question," Rachel agreed. "James says Cole Foster is the kind of man who makes other men want to be better versions of themselves, honest, hardworking, true to his word. You couldn't have chosen better, Jane." "I think he chose me," Jane said thoughtfully. "From that first day when I wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, when I was still covered in bruises from before. He saw something in me worth caring about, worth protecting." "He saw you," Rachel said simply. "The real you beneath the fear and pain. Just as you saw the real him beneath the quiet reserve." She stepped back, admiring her handiwork with the flowers. "There, perfect. Are you ready to go marry your cowboy?" Jane nodded, her heart full. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." The small church was filled to capacity when Jane arrived, with nearly every resident of Cherry Creek crowded into the pews. Mrs. Peterson had saved seats in the front for some of Jane's students, including Tommy Sullivan, who had appointed himself unofficial ring bearer for the ceremony. As the simple wedding march began, played on the church's small organ, Jane stood in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of friendly faces turned toward her. Then her eyes found Cole, standing at the altar beside Reverend Holcomb, and the rest of the world fell away. Cole was dressed in a new black suit, his usually tousled hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught Jane's breath, the look of absolute wonder and love as he watched her walk toward him, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Sheriff Davis escorted Jane down the aisle, having volunteered to give her away in the absence of any family. When they reached the altar, he placed Jane's hand in Cole's with a warm smile and a whispered, "Take care of her." "With my life," Cole replied, his eyes never leaving Jane's face. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Holcomb speaking of love's power to heal and transform, of the sacred bond between husband and wife, of the community that stood ready to support this new union. When it came time for the vows, Cole took both of Jane's hands in his voice steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. Jane's voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises in return, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion she felt. Tommy Sullivan presented the rings with solemn dignity, and Cole slid a simple gold band onto Jane's finger to join her engagement ring. Jane, in turn, placed a matching gold band on Cole's finger, her heart swelling at this tangible symbol of their commitment. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Holcomb proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." With a smile, he added, "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Foster." Cole cupped Jane's face in his hands with exquisite tenderness, his eyes asking the question he had always asked before. Jane's smile gave him his answer, and he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was both reverent and passionate, a promise of all that was to come. The church erupted in cheers and applause, many eyes damp with happy tears as the newlyweds turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife for the first time. The celebration that followed was everything a wedding should be: joyous, heartfelt, filled with laughter and music and delicious food. The entire town danced and feasted until the stars came out, the square aglow with lanterns and bonfires. Cole and Jane moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, occasionally stealing private moments together as they adjusted to the new reality of being husband and wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. Foster?" Cole asked as they shared their first dance on the specially built platform, his arms holding her close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Jane replied, looking up into the face of the man who had taught her to trust again, to love again, to believe in the possibility of joy. "That makes two of us," Cole said, his eyes crinkling at the corners with his smile. "When you arrived in Cherry Creek that day, I had no idea you would change my life so completely." "When I arrived in Cherry Creek that day, I was just hoping to survive," Jane admitted. "I never dreamed I would find a home, a future worth living for." Cole's arms tightened around her. "You have all those things now, Jane, and my promise that as long as I draw breath, you will never lack for love or safety or respect." As the celebration continued around them, Jane leaned her head against Cole's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with bruises and downcast eyes was gone, transformed by time and love, and her own innate strength into someone new, or perhaps someone she had always been beneath the fear and pain: Jane Foster. Wife, teacher, survivor, beloved. When the celebration finally wound down, Cole and Jane slipped away to begin their new life together in the home he had built for them. As they crossed the threshold, Cole swept Jane into his arms, carrying her over the doorstep in the traditional manner. "Welcome home, my love," he said softly, setting her gently on her feet in the front hall. "Home," Jane repeated, looking around at the house that would witness their life together. "Our home." Later that night, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Cole showed Jane with exquisite gentleness what love between a man and a woman was meant to be: not a taking but a giving, not domination but mutual pleasure, not fear but absolute trust. In his arms, Jane finally left behind the last shadows of her past, embracing fully the woman she had become, and the future that stretched before them, a future bright with promise, rich with love, secure in the knowledge that she had found not just safety but true partnership with the man who had seen her worth from the very beginning. 5 years later, Jane stood on the porch of their home, watching as Cole taught their 3-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. The little boy's laughter rang out across the yard, his face alight with excitement as his father led the gentle pony in a circle. "Mama, look at me," James called, waving with one hand while the other clutched the saddle horn. "I see you, sweetheart," Jane called back, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child, a daughter, according to Dr. Parker, would arrive before winter. Cherry Creek had grown significantly in the 5 years since the railroad had come through, nearly doubling in size and importance. Jane still taught at the school, though now with the help of an assistant, a young woman who had graduated from a teaching college in San Francisco. Cole's ranch had prospered as well. The easier transportation provided by the railroad, allowing him to expand his operations and improve his breeding stock. The Double F was now one of the most respected ranches in the region, with Cole occasionally asked to advise other ranchers on their operations. But their greatest joy was their family, the home they had built together, the son who combined Cole's steady nature with Jane's love of books, and now the daughter they would welcome in a few months' time. As Jane watched her husband and son, her heart overflowed with gratitude for the life she had found in this remote Nevada town. Cherry Creek had indeed been the safe haven Cole had promised that first day. But it had become so much more. It had become the place where Jane had rediscovered herself, where she had learned to trust and love again, where she had built a future filled with joy and purpose. Cole looked up, catching her watching them, and his face broke into the smile that still made Jane's heart skip a beat after all these years. He said something to James, then helped the boy dismount before walking toward the porch, the pony following docilely behind. "How are my girls doing?" Cole asked as he climbed the steps, his hand automatically reaching out to rest on Jane's rounded belly. "We're perfect," Jane assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Just enjoying watching the men in my life." Cole leaned down to kiss her, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing but had never lost its sweetness. "I love you, Jane Foster," he murmured against her lips. "And I love you," Jane replied, her voice filled with the certainty of a woman who knew precisely what love meant, not fear or control or pain, but safety, respect, and the profound joy of being truly seen and cherished. As the sun began to set over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Foster family went inside their home together, Cole carrying a sleepy James on his shoulders, Jane following with her hand resting on her belly, the future they had built together surrounding them like an embrace. From the frightened woman with bruises who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes to the confident, beloved wife and mother she had become, Jane's journey had been one of healing, of rediscovery, of transformation. And it had begun with 7 simple words spoken by a quiet cowboy on a dusty street in a small mining town. "You're safe here." Words that had proved to be not just a promise, but a prophecy.